Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room was crowded, maps glowing under the pale blue light of projectors, officers circling like restless shadows. Voices clashed, clipped and urgent. Decisions were being carved in seconds, and yet no one looked at her. She sat at the far end, quiet, still, her hands resting on the edge of the table, not fidgeting, not demanding space. She had learned long ago that silence was its own kind of strength. Let the others speak. Let them doubt. She could carry it. The colonel's voice cut through the air. Extraction window, 20 minutes. No margin for error. We go in, we pull him out, we leave nothing behind. Everyone nodded. No one turned toward her. But she knew something none of them did. Something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Her call sign was Wraith. A sniper, an infiltrator, the one they called when no other option remained. They didn't know the weight of her silence, the reason she chose to keep her voice hidden when the room demanded answers. If she spoke, if she opened her mouth now, the mission would bend in a different direction. And she wasn't sure they were ready to hear it. Her mind drifted back to a desert night years ago, to a small outpost half forgotten by the world, to the first time silence saved her life. She could still smell the sand, the acrid burn of diesel, the metallic taste of fear as she lay beneath a broken wall listening. The enemy passed by, feet inches from her face. They never knew she was there. That night she understood. Silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. She leaned back in her chair, scanning the room. Young men, restless, eager. The sergeant at her left tapping his pen. The lieutenant staring too long at his own boots. Each of them thinking about the danger ahead, each hiding the tremor of fear in a different way. She almost smiled. They thought courage was the absence of fear. She knew better. Courage was carrying fear like a stone in your chest and still stepping forward. The colonel ended the briefing. You all know your roles, move. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, boots struck the floor. One by one they filed out, leaving her the last. She stood slowly, adjusting her gear, the weight of her rifle against her back like a familiar promise. Outside, the night air was colder than expected. The moon hung low, muted by clouds. Helicopters roared, blades cutting through silence like jagged knives. She climbed aboard without a word. The others filled the cabin with chatter, half nervous, half brave. Someone cracked a joke. Another laughed too loudly. She sat in the corner, helmet pulled low, eyes shut, listening, always listening. Because beneath the roar of engines, she could already sense it, the flaw, the detail no one else had seen, the reason this mission wasn't what they thought it was. But she held her silence. Not yet. The flight stretched into an eternity of noise and vibration. She could feel the soldier beside her stealing glances. He was young, barely more than a boy, his hands fidgeting on the strap of his rifle. When he caught her eyes, he froze, then whispered, "Do you ever get used to it?" She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she tilted her head slightly as if to say, "No, and you shouldn't." He nodded, almost grateful for her honesty. The pilot's voice cracked over the comms, 2 minutes, get ready. The cabin shifted, the weight of anticipation pressing down. Hands tightened on weapons, breaths shortened, hearts beat like drums. She opened her eyes. The world outside was darkness, broken only by fragments of light from a distant village. Somewhere in that chaos was their target, an officer trapped behind enemy lines, a man worth saving, or so they were told. But she knew something else. She had read the files, the fragments of intelligence no one else cared about. This wasn't just about an officer. This was about information, about betrayal, about secrets better buried than exposed. The helicopter lurched, skimming low. Dust and heat clawed at the cabin as the ramp lowered. One by one, boots hit dirt. Orders barked. Formation snapped into place. She landed last. The earth beneath her was dry, cracked, smelling of iron and blood. Silence returned, thick, heavy, oppressive, the kind of silence before storms. They moved, shadows sliding between walls, weapons drawn, eyes sharp. Every step was measured. Every breath counted. She stayed at the rear, the place where mistakes revealed themselves first. Minutes stretched, then a sound, faint, a whisper of movement against stone. She froze, raised her hand. The line halted. Nothing. The lieutenant leaned back, whispering too loudly, "What is it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she crouched, pressing her ear to the ground. And there it was, the faint rhythm of boots moving in the distance. Too many. Wrong direction, wrong timing. The trap was already closing. Her chest tightened. She could speak. She could warn them. But if she did, the mission would unravel before it began. And maybe, just maybe, they needed to walk a little further into danger before they would listen. She rose slowly, her rifle settling into her hands. Her silence was a shield. Her silence was a blade. The team advanced, unaware of the storm waiting ahead. She followed, every step heavy with the knowledge of what she carried inside. What she hadn't told them. Not yet. The night deepened. The village loomed, silent as a graveyard. Windows empty, streets deserted, too deserted. The kind of silence that screamed louder than any alarm. Her breath caught, her mind whispered the truth. They know we're here. But still she said nothing. Because silence wasn't weakness. It was her armor, and she would need it now more than ever. Why did the village feel like it was holding its breath? The squad moved carefully, boots crunching softly over dust, rifles cutting narrow arcs of vigilance. Every shadow seemed alive. Every wall seemed to lean in. Yet the deeper they pushed into the village, the more obvious it became. There was no life here. No children. No elders. No dogs barking in the night. It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. The lieutenant whispered, "Looks clear." She wanted to laugh, but only in her head. Clear. The word of the inexperienced, the wish of the blind. She gripped her rifle tighter, scanning the rooftops, the corners, the small details everyone else missed. A curtain swayed in a window without wind. A single chair stood in the middle of an empty street, overturned. She knew what those details meant. She had seen them before in another war, another time. They were signs, warnings, silent screams left behind by those who knew what was coming. Still, she kept her silence. Not yet. The squad formed a perimeter around a crumbling two-story building. Their target was inside, according to intelligence. The colonel's orders echoed in their minds, 20 minutes in and out. The sergeant signaled. 2 men stacked against the door, ready to breach. One held a breaching charge, the other steady with his rifle. Her breath caught, too loud, too obvious. She stepped forward, raising a hand. A silent gesture, "Wait." The sergeant frowned. "What is it?" he hissed. She didn't speak. She knelt, fingers brushing the threshold. Her gloved hand moved carefully along the doorframe until it stopped, over a thin wire, barely visible in the darkness. One step, one careless move, and the blast would have torn them apart. The sergeant's eyes widened, his face drained. He mouthed, "How did you?" But she didn't answer. She simply pointed upward toward the rooftops. Her eyes caught faint reflections, scopes glinting like cold stars in the night. They were already surrounded. The young soldier from the helicopter whispered, voice trembling, "They know we're here." Finally she spoke, just one word, low, controlled, certain. "Yes." The squad froze, every man gripping his weapon tighter, as if her voice had been the trigger of truth they didn't want to face. For some of them, it was the first time they had heard her speak. The sound of it carried weight. The sergeant swallowed. Orders. She didn't give orders. She wasn't their leader. But in that moment, silence had shifted and authority, real authority, had moved toward her. Her eyes swept the rooftops. She calculated lines of fire, angles, distance. She could almost feel the enemy's breaths above them, waiting for panic to break the squad's composure. "We don't go through the door," she said, voice calm. "They want us to." The lieutenant stammered. "Then what do we do?" She studied the alley to their right, narrow and dark, half collapsed with debris. To anyone else it looked like a dead end. To her it was cover, shadow, the kind of place silence could survive. "We move," she said simply. The sergeant didn't argue. He trusted what he saw, the wire she had saved them from, the certainty in her tone. "You heard her. Move." The squad peeled away from the death trap of the front door, slipping into the narrow alley. She took the rear again, her rifle scanning rooftops, her steps measured, every sense sharpened, every sound amplified. The scrape of a loose rock, the whisper of metal against stone. Her silence spoke louder than their fear. Halfway through the alley, gunfire erupted, sharp, cutting, merciless. The world exploded into chaos. Bullets slammed against walls, ricocheted sparks, shredded air. The squad dove for cover, hearts hammering, breaths ragged. She stayed low, controlled, calm. Her eyes found the first glint of muzzle flash on a rooftop. Without hesitation, she exhaled, slow, steady, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked, a single thunderclap in the storm. A body fell. The young soldier stared at her wide-eyed. He had never seen someone so still under fire, so deliberate, as if silence itself guided her aim. Another flash, another shot, another fall. The squad regained rhythm, returning fire, moving in bursts. The sergeant shouted orders, but every eye flicked back to her. She wasn't just another rifle now. She was their anchor, their shield. Still, she knew the truth. They were outnumbered, outpositioned. The rooftops were crawling, the alleys funneling them like prey. This was no rescue mission. This was bait. Her chest tightened with the weight of the secret she had carried. She had suspected from the first file she read. Suspected this officer wasn't worth saving because he wasn't a victim. He was the reason they were here. She remembered his name, his record, the whispers she had overheard late at night. Whispers of betrayal. He had sold them out before. He had blood on his hands, blood of men like the ones now fighting beside her. And yet she had followed orders, because that's what soldiers do. But orders had limits, and she was about to cross them. The alley split ahead, left toward deeper darkness, right toward the target's building. The sergeant gestured right, but her hand shot out, gripping his arm. Their eyes locked. "Left," she said. He hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but in that silence, in that calm certainty, he understood. He nodded. The squad veered left, vanishing into the cover of collapsed walls as gunfire shredded the path they had avoided. Had they gone right, they would be dead already. The young soldier gasped, stumbling beside her. "How did you know?" Her eyes didn't leave the rooftops. "I listen." That was all she gave him. Minutes bled into more firefights, more movements. The squad grew tired, voices strained, ammo counting down in every mind. They didn't speak of fear, but it clung to them, a silent passenger none could shake. In a rare pause, the lieutenant leaned against rubble, panting. "We can't keep this up. We need to finish the mission. Find the officer, get out." Her silence answered first, a stillness so heavy it made the others wait. Finally, she spoke. "Mission's compromised." The words hit like a shot. The lieutenant's face twisted. "You don't know that." "I do." "How?" She met his eyes, steady, unflinching. "Because he wanted this. Because he's not a hostage. He's the one who led them here." The squad fell silent, her words cutting deeper than the bullets had. The sergeant stared at her, searching her face for doubt. He found none. The young soldier whispered, almost to himself, "Then why are we here?" No one answered. The truth was a weight too heavy for words. For the first time that night, she felt the crack in her armor, a fracture in her silence. She thought of the faces of men she had lost years ago, to orders just as blind, to missions just as poisoned. She had sworn then never to let silence be complicity. But silence was also her shield, and now she wasn't sure which side of the blade she stood on. Gunfire erupted again, dragging them back to the present. They moved, fought, endured. Step by step, survival became its own mission. And through it all, she carried the weight of choice. To tell them everything, to break the silence, to shatter the illusion of their orders, or to hold it, to let her silence shield them a little longer. The night gave no answers. Only gunfire. Only fear. Only the silence she wore like armor, even as it began to cut against her own skin. How long could silence hold back the truth? The squad crouched in the ruins of a shattered courtyard, breaths fogging in the cold night air. Walls blackened by fire rose around them, giving the illusion of shelter. But she knew better. Shelter was temporary. Silence was temporary. The young soldier's hands trembled as he reloaded. The sound of the magazine clicking into place was louder than it should have been. Too loud. He cursed under his breath, frustration cracking his composure. She sat against a stone wall, rifle across her knees, eyes distant but alert. Her breathing was slow, steady. To the others she seemed calm, unshaken, but inside a storm brewed. She thought of another night years ago when she had chosen silence over truth. A convoy ambushed. Men she trusted slaughtered because intelligence had been wrong. She had known it, had felt it in her bones, but she hadn't spoken. Silence had protected her then, but cost them their lives. She had sworn never to make the same mistake, and here she was again. The lieutenant broke the silence first. His voice was sharp, desperate, trying to hold on to authority. "We need to push forward, find the officer, that's the mission. Everything else is noise." The sergeant glared at him. "You didn't see what she saw, that wire, those rooftops. That wasn't noise, Lieutenant, that was a setup." The argument spiraled, tension breaking into whispers, then raised voices. Fear made men louder. She stood slowly, cutting them off without a word. The movement itself silenced them. They looked at her as though expecting a judgment, a verdict. Her eyes scanned the courtyard, the broken walls, the darkened streets beyond. "Arguing will get you killed," she said softly. The words were quiet, but they carried, more than orders, they carried truth. The young soldier looked at her, almost pleading. "Then what do we do, if this is a trap, if he's not who they said he is?" She hesitated. For the first time that night, hesitation cracked her armor. She wanted to tell them everything. To tell them she had read between the lines of the file, seen the betrayals, understood the real purpose of this mission. That the man they were sent to save wasn't worth the blood already spilled. But silence chained her tongue. Not yet. The night pressed in. A faint hum drifted on the wind, the sound of distant engines. She tilted her head, listening. Convoy, vehicles circling, reinforcements closing the net. "We move," she said. The sergeant nodded instantly. The lieutenant bristled. "Where? To what end? We can't just wander until dawn." She cut him off with a glance. Cold, sharp, he shut his mouth. The squad slipped from the courtyard into the labyrinth of alleys. Every step was shadow, every breath measured. They moved like hunted things because that's what they were. At one corner she raised a fist, halting the line, her eyes narrowed. The silence here felt different, not empty but waiting. She motioned for the squad to hold position. Then she slipped forward alone. Her boots made no sound, her breathing slowed to nothing. She became what they called her wraith, a ghost, a silence sharper than any blade. She rounded the corner and froze. There in the flickering light of a burning oil drum stood the officer, their supposed objective. Hands tied, face bruised, uniform torn, surrounded by two armed guards. "To Ezzy." Her instincts screamed, the angle was wrong. The guards' stances were casual, careless, a stage. She melted back into shadow before they could notice her. When she returned to the squad, her expression was unreadable. "He's here," she whispered. The lieutenant's eyes lit with relief. "Then let's move." Her silence lingered, long enough for the sergeant to notice. He frowned, but she didn't answer, not directly. Instead, she spoke with deliberate weight. "It's too easy." The young soldier swallowed hard. "You mean it's bait?" She didn't confirm, she didn't deny, but her silence said enough. The squad shifted uneasily. Loyalty to orders battled with loyalty to survival. None of them had signed up to die for a lie, but none of them could walk away without proof. The sergeant made the call. "We take him, but on our terms." They moved into position, shadows among shadows, covering angles, preparing for the inevitable storm. She took the overwatch. Climbing silently onto a broken rooftop, she settled into place, rifle steady, eyes on the scene. The officer shifted against his bonds, his face tilting toward her position. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. And in that look she saw it, not fear, not relief. Recognition. Her chest tight, he knew she was there, knew she was watching. And he wasn't surprised. Her finger hovered on the trigger. One shot and this could end. One shot and the squad would never know the truth she carried. But she didn't pull it. Not yet. The sergeant signaled. The squad struck swift, precise. 2 guards dropped in seconds. The officer was pulled from the firelight, dragged into shadow. Gunfire erupted from rooftops instantly, as she had expected. Bullets tore through walls, cracked stone, filled the night with fury. She answered with silence, each shot a whisper of judgment. Enemy silhouettes dropped, one by one. Below, the squad pulled the officer into cover. He stumbled, but his movements were too practiced, too controlled. Even bound, he moved like a man who knew he was in command. The young soldier shouted, "We've got him, move." She stayed above, covering, but her mind spun. She could end this now. She could reveal the truth. But what if she was wrong? What if her silence was only paranoia, a shadow of old scars? Could she condemn a man without proof? The firefight dragged into minutes. Sweat burned her eyes. Ammo ran low. The squad tightened around the officer, their objective. And still, he didn't look like a man grateful for rescue. He looked like a man waiting. When they finally broke contact and slipped into the darkness beyond the village, her silence grew heavier. The squad laughed nervously, relief spilling out. The lieutenant clapped the officer on the shoulder. "We got you out, sir. You're safe now." The officer smiled, small, controlled, cold. She saw it, she felt it. And she knew. The silence she wore like armor was about to break. Because the truth couldn't stay buried much longer. Why did his smile linger when it should have vanished? The squad moved through the night like hunted animals, weaving between ruins, ducking beneath broken archways, slipping across streets that smelled of dust and old fire. The officer stumbled at times, his hands still bound, but the sergeant's grip kept him upright. To anyone else, he looked like a man just barely holding on. To her, he looked rehearsed. Every step made her chest tighten. She followed from the rear, her rifle slung low, eyes scanning shadows. Her silence felt different now, not protective but heavy, sharp edges cutting inward. The lieutenant kept glancing at the officer as though salvation itself walked beside him. "We'll get you back, sir. Don't you worry. Command's waiting." The officer only nodded. Not once did he ask about the mission. Not once did he show gratitude. His eyes searched the darkness, measuring distance, timing. She had seen eyes like that before. Years ago, in a desert town abandoned to the wind, she had trusted a man with those same eyes, trusted his words, his promises. And when silence became her shield, she hadn't warned her squad. By the time the trap closed, it was too late. She had lived. They hadn't. Now, walking through this broken village with the squad around her, the past pressed against the present like overlapping scars. The young soldier broke her thoughts. He jogged back to her side, breath uneven, whispering, "You don't trust him, do you?" Her gaze didn't shift. "Why do you ask?" "Because you haven't said 10 words all night," he murmured. "And when you finally look at him, it's different. I can feel it." She wanted to tell him everything, to unchain the silence at last. But his face, so young, so eager to believe in the purpose of this mission, stopped her. If she shattered his trust now, what would he cling to when the bullets returned? So she said only, "Keep your eyes open." He nodded, though confusion lingered in his eyes. The squad pressed forward. The sergeant found them a temporary shelter in the shell of an old schoolhouse. Crumbling walls, shattered windows, chalk still faint on broken boards. They set a perimeter, rifles steady at each opening. The lieutenant eased the officer onto a bench. "You're safe here until exfil, just a few hours." The officer gave another of those smiles, thin, hollow. "I appreciate your efforts." It was the first full sentence he had spoken since his rescue. His voice was smooth, steady. Too steady for a man supposedly brutalized by captivity. The sergeant frowned. He noticed it too. The young soldier whispered to her as they sat down near the doorway. "See, he doesn't act like us, doesn't act like he's scared." Her silence deepened. The officer looked across the room, his eyes locking with hers. For a moment, the noise of the squad, the creak of the old building, the distant echo of engines outside, all of it faded. It was just him and her. And in that silence his expression shifted, subtle, as though he knew exactly who she was, exactly what she suspected. Her pulse slowed, her finger twitched against the trigger of her rifle. One squeeze and this would end, but she didn't move. Not yet. The sergeant sat across from the officer. His tone was blunt, heavy with suspicion. "How long were you held?" "Days." "No marks on you," the sergeant said flatly. "Not the kind I'd expect." The officer shrugged. "Luck, perhaps." She almost laughed at the word. Luck. No one survived this long on luck. The lieutenant cut in, defensive, desperate to hold the mission together. "He's alive. That's what matters. Let's not turn this into—" The sergeant snapped. "Open your eyes, Lieutenant. Something's wrong here." The argument simmered, voices clashing against the crumbling walls. The officer remained calm, as though enjoying the discord. She turned away, her silence heavier than the storm gathering inside her. Hours passed. The squad rotated, watch, exhaustion pressing against them all. She took the rooftop, where the cold air bit harder, where the silence stretched wide and unbroken. The young soldier joined her, shivering slightly. "Do you ever doubt?" he asked suddenly. She glanced at him. "About what?" "About all of this. Missions, orders, whether what we're told is the truth." Her chest tightened. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell him doubt was the only honest thing she had left. That silence wasn't just armor, it was the space where questions lived. But she saw the weight already in his eyes, the fear he carried but hadn't named. If she gave him her truth, it might crush him. So she said softly, "Doubt is survival, just don't let it freeze you." He nodded, almost grateful. Below, the officer shifted on the bench. Even tied, even guarded, he seemed too calm, too patient, like a man waiting for a signal only he could hear. And then she heard it. Not through her ears, but through her bones. A faint vibration beneath the rooftop, the hum of engines, the low grind of wheels. Her heart stopped. She crouched, pressing her palm against the rooftop stone. It trembled faintly with the weight of something approaching. Not random, not lost, coming directly toward them. The trap wasn't over, it had only just begun. She whispered down through the window, "They're coming." The sergeant snapped alert, barking orders. Weapons lifted, adrenaline surged, the lieutenant paled. The officer only smiled. Her silence fractured, rage burned in her chest. She leveled her rifle at him through the window. Her voice, low but unshakable, cut through the storm. "You led them here." The squad froze. The words echoed like a shot. The officer tilted his head, almost amused. "You're sharper than the rest, always were." Recognition flickered in his eyes again. Not just recognition, memory. He knew her. Somehow, someway, their paths had crossed before. Her mind raced. A face half-remembered from dossiers. A whisper from intelligence reports. A man who had traded lives for information, who had disappeared before justice could find him. The sergeant growled, "What the hell is she talking about?" The officer's calm cracked into a smirk. "Ask your command, if they'll ever tell you the truth." The lieutenant's face collapsed, disbelief tearing at him. "No, no, this mission was his." She didn't let him finish. "He's not a prisoner, he's bait, and we're the catch." Engines roared outside. Headlights slashed against the broken schoolhouse walls. The building shook as armored trucks drew close. The squad stared at her, at the officer, at the truth unraveling before their eyes. Her silence, her shield, her armor, she had carried it as long as she could. But now it was broken. Now it was fire. And as gunfire erupted outside, slamming into the schoolhouse walls, she realized something deeper. Silence hadn't been her only shield. It had been her prison, too. Why did the sound of rain feel louder than the pounding artillery outside? She sat beneath the crumbled remains of a roof, water dripping steadily near her boots, her rifle balanced across her lap like a fragile secret. Her squad was spread thin now. 2 gone in the first hour. Another missing, maybe worse. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard their last words, short, half-finished, carried away by the storm. She was supposed to lead them back. Not here, not broken, not hiding in the hollow of a shattered building where even the walls seemed to hold their breath. But silence was her refuge. The others had learned to listen for her nods, her gestures, the way she moved without words. She never shouted orders. She didn't have to. In the quiet, her decisions carried heavier weight than any command barked into the chaos. Still, inside her chest, the storm raged. "Lieutenant, do we wait here?" one of the younger soldiers asked, voice barely audible, trembling not just from the cold. Her eyes met his. She didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, shaping the air between them. His breathing slowed, steadying with hers. He understood even before she lifted her hand and pointed east toward the ridge. There was no safety there, but there was high ground, and a signal relay they needed to disable before reinforcements turned the tide against them. She hadn't told them that part. Not yet. They followed her into the rain. Boots sinking into mud, helmets slick with water, weapons cradled like lifelines. Every step pulled at memories she didn't want. The sound of her brother's laughter before his last deployment, the way his letters stopped coming. He had been the reason she enlisted. Not revenge, not glory, just the aching need to stand where he had stood, to finish what he never could. A flare burst in the sky, sharp and green. The team froze. She lifted her fist and they pressed low into the earth, eyes searching. Silence again. Only rain, only the pounding of their own hearts. Then movement. Figures cutting through the mist, too many, too close. Her hand brushed the side of her rifle. Every instinct screamed to fire, but she didn't. She waited, still as stone, her team watching her more than the enemy. The silence bound them, held them steady while the figures passed within meters. The rain cloaked their breath, their fear, their trembling. When the last shadow disappeared into the fog, one of her men whispered, "How did you know?" She didn't answer, she just moved forward. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged against the storm-lit sky. Thunder cracked, distant but threatening. She climbed first, mud slipping beneath her gloves, muscles aching. Every motion reminded her of climbing trees as a child, of her brother teasing her for falling and scraping her knees. The ache was heavier now, the cost greater, but she climbed anyway. At the crest she saw it, the relay tower skeletal against the storm, pulsing with faint light. Guarded, too many for their numbers, she knew what had to be done, and it wasn't survival. Her breath caught, not from fear but from the weight of choice. The silence that had always been her shield now felt like a coffin closing in. She could send them in. They might die. She could go alone. She likely would. But then one of her soldiers whispered, "We trust you." The word stung more than any bullet. Trust. She wanted to scream at them to run, to leave her, but silence was all she had left. She signaled, they moved. And in that storm, in that silence, she realized, strength wasn't measured in how loud you commanded. It was in the quiet moments when hearts beat as one, when trust outweighed fear. Still, as the first shot rang out, breaking the storm's rhythm, she thought of her brother, how he had died before he could finish his story, and how she might finish hers the same way. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Why was her hand trembling when it touched the detonator? It wasn't fear of death. She had rehearsed that end 1,000 times in her head. It was the thought of what her silence would leave behind. No farewell. No words for the ones who followed her. Only the echo of a choice. The rain had eased, but mist still clung to the ridge. The relay tower blinked like a heartbeat in the fog, its hum cutting through the night. Guards paced beneath, rifles cradled lazily, unaware of the ghosts crawling toward them. Her squad waited, eyes on her. They wanted the plan, the certainty, but she hadn't told them everything. She hadn't told them the relay was more than a target. It was a trap, one wired to draw the enemy in, to broadcast not just signals but lies, false hope, coordinates meant to pull her people into a slaughter. Disabling it wasn't enough. It had to be destroyed, and that meant staying behind. She pressed her back to the rock, breathing slow, deliberate. In the silence, memories came uninvited. Her brother's face, his hands clapping mud from her knees when she was 12, his voice in the last letter, half sentences, unfinished promises. She had never replied. By the time she tried, the news had already arrived. He was gone. A shadow moved near the tower. Her rifle rose, smooth, steady now. One shot, a crack swallowed by the storm. The guard dropped limp. Her squad surged forward, silent phantoms in the mist, dispatching the others with swift precision. No battle cry, no noise, only silence. Their silence. Then came the breach. Wires, consoles, the core humming with dangerous light. She knew technology better than most. She knew what would happen if she pulled the wrong lead, if she cut too soon. But the squad was looking at her, trusting her. She couldn't let them see her doubt. "Ma'am," one of them whispered, the youngest, his voice cracked. She nodded once, then crouched to the console. Her hands worked fast, memorized motions, but her eyes lingered on the detonator tucked in her vest. The last resort. She thought of speaking, just once, telling them the truth, but her throat closed. The silence was her language, her armor. If she broke it now, would she still be her? The relay sparked. Lights died. The hum faltered. Relief flickered across their faces. They thought it was over, but she knew better. She could hear it, the deeper pulse beneath, the charge buried in the foundation. A failsafe, a bomb. Her chest tightened. This was the trap. The tower wasn't meant to stand. It was meant to collapse, to bury anyone who touched it. She glanced at the squad. They were tired, mud-caked, eyes hollow, but still alive. They didn't deserve to die here. She did. Her hand brushed the detonator again. A strange calm spread through her veins. She would stay. She would finish it. Her silence would buy them life. But then another voice cut through the fog, a whisper not her own. "Don't." It was the sergeant. Older, scarred, weary from too many battles. He was watching her hand. He knew. His eyes said what she wouldn't. "You've carried enough." She froze. For the first time, she felt the weight of her silence pressing against someone else's will. Did she have the right to decide? To choose death for herself while leaving them behind with that burden? The ground trembled. Time was gone. She shoved the detonator into his hand. His eyes widened, then hardened. She motioned for the squad to move, urgency in her gestures. They obeyed, confusion rippling through their ranks but trust pulling them along. The sergeant stayed, his choice, his silence answering hers. When the blast came, it swallowed the ridge in fire and thunder. The squad hit the dirt, ears ringing, heat scorching their backs. She turned just once, saw the silhouette of the tower collapsing, flames consuming the mist. And in that roar she felt her silence shatter, not in words but in grief. She had traded her death for another's, a burden shared, a choice she hadn't been ready to make. The squad looked at her differently now, not with blind trust, with questions, with the knowledge that silence could be both shield and blade. And inside her a thought burned. This isn't over. Not until I decide what my silence truly means. Why did the world feel smaller after the blast? The smoke swallowed the ridge like a living thing, curling down into the valley, dragging ash across faces that had only hours before been full of fight. The relay tower lay in ruins, a skeleton of iron and flame. The sound of it, metal shearing, concrete giving way, kept repeating in her head long after her ears stopped ringing. It was a chorus of endings. They crawled out from the crater like survivors of a shipwreck, mud and blood mixing in the seams of their uniforms. The rain had returned, gentle now, as if the sky itself wanted to wash the night clean. But no rainfall could rinse away the weight lodged between her ribs. They counted heads. Voices broke under the tally. 2 missing. 1 pinned, gone when the earth had closed. The sergeant, who had taken the detonator, was on his knees near the crater, face buried in his hands, shoulders shuddering with a grief that was not only his. He had paid with himself for the choice she'd forced him into. He looked older now, and she thought she could see, in the slack of his jaw, the moment he realized what the cost of loyalty could be. The young soldier, the one who had asked if she ever doubted, sat with his back to a scorched wall, staring at his mud-caked boots as if numbers on the toe could tell him why some came back and others did not. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The silence from him was raw and honest. It was a question that needed answering. Around them the squad moved like ghosts, checking weapons, wrapping wounds, speaking in short, clipped sentences that tried but failed to stitch the night back together into something whole. The lieutenant paced, face white, anger fighting with grief. "We were set up," he kept saying, as if repetition could make it less true. "We were fed lies." She watched them all, steadier than she felt. Her hands, those small, steady hands, shook once and then stopped. She could feel the eyes of the squad on her now, not only for direction but for confession. They wanted to know why she had kept silence. They wanted to know why she had let them walk into a trap. They wanted quietly to blame someone, someone to hold, someone to explain. She had always believed silence could protect. Tonight, silence had nearly killed them. The sergeant rose slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He looked at her then, no accusation, only a tired, salt-cracked kindness that made her own throat sting. "You made a call," he said, voice a gravel road of exhaustion. "You chose." She wanted to answer, to say that choosing was always the only thing she knew how to do, to tell them about the file she'd found weeks ago, the inconsistencies in the briefing, the way the officer's records matched a pattern she'd seen before. To tell them about the convoy in the desert where she'd kept silent and men died, about the letters unopened on her brother's table. To tell them that silence once saved her, but also betrayed her. But the words lodged in her throat like splinters. She had promised herself to protect them. She had promised she would bear the weight if it meant saving the rest. She had given the sergeant that weight with the detonator. That was her choice. That was the line she had drawn between the living and the dead. "Why didn't you tell us?" the lieutenant demanded suddenly, sharp as a snapped wire. His face was wet with rain and something colder, humiliation. "Why did we have to find out in the blast?" His words hit like a hand. The squad's eyes closed around her like slow shutters. She saw faces she knew, the boy who clutched his rifle like a talisman, the medic with the blood on her sleeve, the older private who hummed to himself when he slept to ward off nightmares. They were human. They were small and brave and foolish. They were also the ones she had promised to keep alive. Finally she spoke, not loud but clear. "I thought I could steer it." It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a confession. It was a fact that tasted like rust in her mouth. "I thought I could make the enemy play by my rules. I thought if I kept quiet I could watch the strings and cut only what needed cutting." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "You made a gamble with our lives." She looked at him, the man who clung to doctrine as if it were a lifeline. "Maybe. But if I had told you everything, if we acted earlier, we might have burned through the cover before we knew what it was. Or," she swallowed, "or we might have walked away and left him to warn them. I don't know." The young soldier finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed but steadier than before. Did you, did you ever stop to think we'd follow you even if you were wrong? He asked it without malice, only the blunt ache of truth between them. She almost laughed then, a sound like something breaking. Yes. They moved to the center of the ruined schoolhouse, where the officer, cleaner now, oddly untouched by the night's chaos, sat on a broken bench, hands cuffed, eyes cold and distant. He watched them with a calm that made her skin crawl. The lieutenant stepped forward, fists clenched. "Why?" he demanded, voice raw. "Why lead your own people into this?" The officer smiled, small and surgical. "Because war is a ledger," he said, "and sometimes debts are paid in blood." The room seemed to constrict. The words were empty of apology, full of calculation. "You betrayed us," the lieutenant spat. "You betrayed your uniform." He only shrugged. "I betrayed orders." Silence lifted for a breath like a veil. The young soldier's hand trembled as he lifted his rifle, finger hovering near the trigger. For a heartbeat the world narrowed to the cold metal sight, to the man who had traded lives for strategy. Then the sergeant stepped forward, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We don't execute in the field," he said quietly. "You know that." The boy's shoulders slumped. He lowered his weapon, but his eyes didn't leave the officer. They wanted justice. They wanted a simple moral equation. He did wrong, therefore he must die. War doesn't give simple answers, though. It gives only choices. Choices that echo in the dark. She moved closer to the officer until she could see the tiny scar at his lip, a mark she recognized from a dossier photo years old. The memories came like punches. The convoy, the screams, the empty radios. She felt, suddenly, absurdly, like a child again who had seen a cruel trick and been too afraid to tell. "Why?" she asked, the single syllable a knife. Not an accusation, a plea, for truth, for meaning, for some thread that might make sense of why men die so others can be called heroes. He looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered, a recognition that wasn't only professional. "You were at Badrin," he said. "You were the one who survived." Her breath hitched. The name landed like a stone. The convoy, Badrin, the memory of sand and smoke, of radios dead, of men silenced in their bunks, her brother's laugh, the letter she'd been too late to read. He had been there, he had known. "You knew us," she said. "You knew who would follow." He smiled, the smile of someone who had long ago learned how small details corral men into traps. Names help when you need obedience. For a moment, the weight of everything she'd carried, years of holding back, of watching, of letting silence do the job of judgment, slid off her shoulders like a wet cloak. She hated him then, in a way that had no mercy. Hatred not just for what he had done, but for what he had made of her silence, a tool he'd used against her own people. The sergeant stepped between them, voice low and steady. "We'll hand him over to command. Let the law decide." He looked at her with something like compassion, but it hurt because she knew it was pity too. Pity for a soldier who'd worn silence like armor and found it cut both ways. The lieutenant spat again, then turned away, shoulders shaking with a rage that was almost childlike. The squad divided, some arguing to move fast, to get out of the valley before reinforcements returned. Others wanted to wait, to keep watch, to bury those who had fallen. The night was fracturing into duties and doubts. She found the young soldier by the charred remains of the relay's console, picking through debris. He looked up when she approached. There was something in his face that had shifted, not forgiveness yet, but a kind of understanding that had been stripped raw and then reborn. "You could have told us," he said simply. Not a demand, just a truth. She knelt beside him. Rain dotted her cheek like a salt she had been born with. "I did tell myself," she said. "I told myself I could control it, that I could steer the lie like a ship past a reef. I was afraid that if I spoke, they'd lose the only chance we had to see the bigger picture. I was afraid of being wrong. Mostly, I was afraid of failing them again." His jaw tightened. "You failed some of them." "Yes," the word was small, honest. It sat between them like a scar. "But I saved others." He stared at her for a long time. Then he reached out, placing his palm against hers with the simplicity of someone who didn't need speeches. It was a young, steady gesture. Not absolution, not permission, just contact, real and human. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter rotor whined, a promise of extraction and of questions that would follow. They couldn't stay. They had to move before the valley filled again with those who had planned this night. Orders, justice, revenge, everything would catch up. She rose, the rain washing at her face. She looked one last time at the crater where the tower had been, at the broken men and the fallen. Her silence had cost them. It had saved them. It had been a choice as sharp as any bullet. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the quiet fracture become something else. Less an armor, more a decision. She gathered her squad. They moved out under the low clouds, each step a thud of survival and regret. Behind them, the valley swallowed the smoke, and in that swallowing there was a question she could no longer avoid. What would she do with her silence when the world asked for answers? The night gave no reply, only the steady thunder of their boots and the soft, watchful rain. What did silence sound like after everything had been burned away? It wasn't the absence of sound, not here. The valley still whispered with rotors in the distance, the shuffle of boots, the muffled cough of someone whose lungs ached from smoke. But inside her, silence had a new weight. It wasn't the shield she once carried into battle. It wasn't the armor that kept her apart. It was something else now, fragile, raw, almost human. The squad trudged through the last stretch of mud toward the extraction zone, every man and woman carrying more than their packs allowed. They carried names, unfinished jokes, arguments that would never be settled. They carried the image of a ridge swallowed in flame, and they carried the unspoken question of what their silence, and hers, meant now. The helicopter's lights cut through the mist at last, two beams sweeping like tired eyes. They didn't run. No one had the strength. They walked as if through water, each step pulling them closer to the end of a chapter they didn't know how to close. When the bird touched down, the wash of wind flattened the grass around them, whipping rain into their faces. The crew chief waved them forward. They climbed in, one by one, until she was the last. She lingered, her boots sinking into the soaked earth. She turned back once, staring at the ridge, at the black silhouette of smoke rising against the storm. It looked smaller now, distant, but the weight of it sat in her chest, heavy and alive. "Lieutenant," the crew chief shouted over the roar. She climbed aboard. The door slammed. The helicopter lifted, leaving the valley behind. Inside, the squad sat in silence. Helmets on knees, eyes distant, hands fidgeting with straps and buckles that didn't need fidgeting. The young soldier stared out the window, lips pressed together, as if memorizing the pattern of rivers below so he'd never forget where men had died. The sergeant leaned back, eyes closed, his body swaying with the rhythm of the bird. He looked at peace, but she knew better. She sat apart, her rifle across her lap, her hands folded tight. Every vibration of the engine seemed to echo in her bones. She thought of her brother's last letter. She thought of the convoy at Badrin. She thought of the officer now bound and gagged in the corner, guarded by two soldiers who would never forgive him, but would not harm him either. She thought of the silence she had worn like armor, and the silence she had broken when she finally spoke. When the helicopter banked, the city appeared through the clouds. Lights glittered below, steady, oblivious. Somewhere out there, mothers would be setting tables, children laughing over spilled milk. The world kept turning. The war was a storm only a few had walked through. At base, debriefing waited. Questions sharp as scalpels. Reports, inquiries, hearings. Some would want to know why she hadn't spoken sooner. Others would want to know how she had led men into fire and brought them out alive. Both answers were true. Neither answer would heal. As they touched down, the squad shuffled out, boots hitting tarmac with the heaviness of souls who carried more than gear. She walked last, her head bowed against the rain that hadn't stopped since the ridge. They passed through floodlit corridors, past officers with clipboards and tight jaws, past medics shouting numbers. The squad peeled off one by one until she was alone in the long hall, her rifle still slung across her back, her silence louder than the storm outside. In the interrogation room, they sat her across from a colonel who had never dirtied his boots in that valley. His eyes flicked over her like she was just another line in a ledger. He asked questions in the sharp, clipped tone of someone who believed answers were clean. "Why didn't you warn them?" She said nothing. "Why didn't you abandon the mission when you suspected compromise?" Her silence stretched across the table. Finally, his voice cracked with impatience. "What do you think your silence cost?" Her eyes lifted. For a moment he saw something that startled him, not defiance, not guilt, something steadier, quieter, older. "It cost," she said softly, her first word in hours. "And it saved. That's all war ever does." The colonel leaned back, dissatisfied, but she didn't wait for his judgment. She had already judged herself. When they released her, she walked back into the rain. The squad was waiting, scattered under the awning, faces pale and drawn. No words passed between them. They didn't need them. The silence that stretched between their tired breaths was no longer a prison. It was a bond. The young soldier met her eyes. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand truths. He just gave a small nod as if to say, "We heard you," even in the silence. She returned the nod. Her throat ached with the things she could have said, but didn't. Some stories didn't need telling. Some truths lived in silence. That night, alone in her bunk, she opened her brother's last letter. The paper was worn, the ink smudged. His words were simple, almost ordinary. "Take care of yourself. Don't let the noise of the world drown who you are." She folded it back carefully. For the first time, she didn't cry. She only sat in silence, steady and alive. Because silence wasn't emptiness. It wasn't avoidance. It was choice. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The rain outside slowed until the night was quiet again. And in that quiet, her story ended, not with a battle cry, but with silence that would outlast them all.